This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy. We go deep and lightly surface the big ideas. Usually, when we talk about a high-stakes true crime mystery, you sort of expect this classic cat and mouse game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The dogged detective, the brilliant criminal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You picture that dramatic final confrontation where the cuffs finally click into place. But if you step back into the mid-20th century, specifically Dallas, Texas, you find a story that just completely shatters that mold.
It really does.
Because for years, there was this notorious jewel thief, and he was known only as the King of Diamonds. And he was absolutely terrorizing the wealthiest women in the city. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars in stolen high-end jewelry lifted right out of the most secure mansions in the state.
And, the response to these thefts was completely unprecedented. This wasn't some localized, small-time operation where, a couple of precinct detectives knock on doors.
Right.
The Dallas police worked this case for years. The FBI got involved.
Right.
Yeah, they brought in Scotland Yard. The French Sûreté weighed in, along with the Mexican Federal Police. It was this massive, coordinated, global manhunt for a phantom who was somehow just operating right in the city's own backyard.
And the local newspapers are running these screaming headlines every week, The upper-class gossip network is an absolute overdrive. People are terrified.
Yeah. Panic.
But here's where the narrative takes a really sharp turn. The police actually solved it.
They did.
They tracked the thief's signature waffle print shoe prints from a crime scene directly to his front door. They knew exactly who the King of Diamonds was, but he was never arrested.
Never.
He never saw the inside of a jail cell, never stood trial for the millions he stole.
And the reason he never stood trial really comes down to his name, which was John Taylor Higginbotham, Jr.
Right.
John was born into a family that was so deeply and inextricably entrenched in the city's power structure that he basically existed in a completely different legal reality than the rest of the population.
Just a different set of rules entirely.
Exactly. I mean, to comprehend the scale of his family's influence, you just have to look at his family tree. His cousin married the granddaughter of President Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt.
Jeez.
His aunt married the widower of the only child of 2 Texas governors. So his family, they weren't just participants in the local economy, they were the architects of the local reality.
Yeah, so when the police finally pieced the evidence together, the local detective doesn't go make an arrest.
No, of course not.
Instead, he goes to one of the victims and flatly tells her, and this is a direct quote, "You will be sorry if you press charges."
It's wild. A police detective actively threatening a victim to protect a serial jewel thief.
It sounds like fiction. But that story, it perfectly sets the stage for our mission today. Because for this deep dive, we are exploring a really fascinating sociological paper by Shea O'Brien.
Yes.
It's titled Old Money, How the Intimate Exchange of Wealth, Status, and Power Generates Upper-Class Persistence. And today, we are attempting to understand the actual mechanics of how the 1% stays the 1%.
Which is such a remarkable piece of research, because it forces us to discard that lazy cliche of, a trust fund kid simply living off a rich father's bank account.
Right, like the cartoon version of wealth.
Exactly. Wealth persistence is rarely that fragile or that linear. O'Brien's work zooms out to examine a much more complex, invisible architecture, which she calls a kinship interlock.
A kinship interlock, which is basically imagine this massive invisible web of family ties that acts like a literal force field of privilege.
That's a great way to put it.
So if you're listening to this right now, whether you are just curious about how inequality actually functions behind closed doors, or you just want to know the mechanics of how high society gets away with grand larceny and literally murder, which we're going to get to later.
We definitely are.
This deep dive is going to completely change how you view power, capital, and family. So to really grasp this, we need to understand where this data comes from. How do you even begin to map an invisible force field?
Well, you map it by undertaking just an almost unimaginably dense archival project.
Yeah.
The researcher, Shea O'Brien, she didn't just go interview a few wealthy families or look at a handful of tax brackets. She hand-constructed a historical data set encompassing the entire elite population of Dallas from its founding in 1841 all the way to 1963.
Wow, over a century.
Yeah. We're talking about tracking over 20,000 individuals.
Not just 20,000 disconnected individuals, right? She's effectively mapping the DNA of the city's power grid.
Precisely. She pulled from birth and death certificates, the manuscript census, marriage records, probate files, genealogical databases, even local society pages from the Dallas Morning News.
That is so much paperwork.
Or required tracking wealth transfers through wills, noting who attended whose private parties, and this was perhaps the most difficult part, tracking women whose surnames changed through multiple marriages.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that would be a nightmare to trace.
It was. But ultimately, she mapped out over 104,000 direct kin ties. Spouses, parents, children, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents.
Okay, so really quickly, before we dive into what she actually found within those 104,000 ties, we do need to acknowledge the parameters of the reality this data set is mapping.
Yes, that's crucial.
Because we are looking at a Southern American city from 1841 to 1963. And you cannot accurately discuss the history of wealth and power in this specific context without encountering the mechanics of racial dominance, enslavement, and strictly enforced gender roles.
You really can't.
The dataset inherently reflects a system that was built on these exclusionary practices. And we want to be super clear with you, the listener. We aren't here to editorialize or take political sides or impose a modern moral lens on this.
Right.
Our goal today is simply to impartially deconstruct the historical and sociological mechanisms exactly as the source data presents them. Because, as we'll see, those exclusionary practices are the very foundation of how these networks function.
That historical grounding is essential. Because the rules of the game that maintain these power structures, they just don't make sense unless you understand the exclusionary environment they were explicitly built to preserve.
Exactly. Okay, so with that established, let's define what a kinship interlock actually is.
Right. So in sociology, there is a well-known concept called a corporate interlock.
Okay.
This happens when a network of seemingly independent corporations is linked because the exact same small group of people sit on all their boards of directors.
So it's a highly efficient way to consolidate power, share insider information, and basically prevent competition.
Exactly.
So a kinship interlock applies that exact same logic of consolidation, but instead of corporate boardrooms, we are looking at family trees and dinner tables.
You nailed it. A kinship interlock is a highly dense portion of a family network where almost every single person is an elite or is directly related to one. And the data categorizes elites into three distinct types.
Okay, what are they?
First, you have economic elites. So, the millionaires, the bank presidents, corporate founders. Then you have political elites, mayors, judges, and the unofficial behind-the-scenes power brokers.
Right.
And finally, you have social elites, the members of ultra-exclusive clubs, the debutantes, the arbiters of high society. So, in a kinship interlock, you are completely cocooned by these people.
Wow.
Your immediate circle controls, or very proximate to, immense capital, governmental authority, and social legitimacy.
Which is wild to think about, because if you are listening to this right now and thinking about your own family tree, you probably have a mix of professions and circumstances, right?
Wow, yeah.
Maybe an aunt who's a teacher, a cousin who's a mechanic, an accountant, someone who does really well, someone who struggles.
Normal family stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you are born into a kinship interlock, you have to imagine looking around your Thanksgiving table and realizing every single person sitting there controls a major city institution. Your father is a bank president, your uncle is the mayor, your aunt runs the most exclusive social club in the state, and your cousin is a federal judge.
It creates a fundamentally different reality.
Yeah.
And to demonstrate just how critical this network is, the source material offers this really brilliant comparative analysis of two specific women, Betty Hearn Aldridge and Agnes Burke Marshall.
Yeah, this comparison is fascinating because from a purely statistical standpoint, these two women are practically identical.
Almost clones on paper.
Right. If a classical economist were looking at them as isolated individuals, they would predict the exact same trajectory. Both were white, Protestant, Dallas housewives living in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Yep.
They were born in the same decade, died in the same decade, and crucially, they died with the exact same amount of personal wealth.
Which is the key detail.
Neither held political office. Neither made a formal high society debut. On paper, they are a perfect match.
But sociologically, the outcomes for their descendants could not be more different. Agnes's family experienced what we call a regression to the mean.
Meaning they drifted back to average.
Exactly. Agnes's husband was a successful, upwardly mobile oil man. Their daughter married an oilman. But within just a couple of generations, that upward momentum stalled out and completely reversed. Her 3 sons became salesmen and machinists. Her grandchildren firmly settled into the middle or working class. One granddaughter was briefly a child movie star, actually, but she ended up as a lower middle-class housewife married to a factory foreman.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Agnes's lineage completely fell out of the upper class almost a century ago.
But Betty's family went in the complete opposite direction. They didn't just maintain their wealth, they became permanently entrenched in the ruling class.
Very deeply entrenched.
I mean, Betty's great-grandson was literally a mayor pro tem in the Dallas area as recently as 2026. Her granddaughters made these highly publicized high society debuts. Her family is still a recognized part of the elite today.
Yeah, it's a huge divergence.
So we have to ask why. If they started with the exact same wealth, why did Agnes's family fade into the working class while Betty's became this unbreakable dynasty?
Well, the determining factor was the density of their respective kinship networks. Agnes was upwardly mobile, sure, but she was sociologically isolated. Her mother was a dressmaker, her father a machinist.
Right.
When her husband made his money in oil, they had capital, but they did not have a surrounding network of elites. Betty, on the other hand, was born right into the center of a sprawling kinship interlock.
Oh.
She was born on a massive plantation, which provided immense baseline wealth. Her husband leveraged his connections to become a district judge. One of her sons became a banker, another an engineer, and a third became the mayor of Dallas.
Wow. Okay.
And crucially, all of her sons married upper-class women who brought their own massive family resources into the collective pool.
So it's essentially like a corporate merger, isn't it? A kinship interlock operates like a highly diversified portfolio of power.
Yeah.
Because if I only have money and the market crashes, I'm ruined. But if my family is a kinship interlock, my wealth isn't held in a single asset class.
Right, it's distributed.
Exactly. If the money cousin loses his business, the social status aunt can introduce him to new investors, or the political uncle can secure him a lucrative government contract. You basically cannot go broke because the family functions as a closed-loop bailout system.
That is an exceptionally accurate way to frame it. The research explicitly argues that in the upper class, all fortunes are family fortunes. Power is family power. Sociologists often make this mistake of looking at an individual and saying, oh, this person is elite because they personally control X amount of money.
Yeah.
But this data set proves that resources flow continuously and densely across close kin ties.
So it's not just your bank account.
No, you don't just own your personal wealth. You have latent access to the wealth, status, and power of your entire network.
And the numbers backed this up dramatically, because the researcher found that about 40% of the overall upper class from 1910 managed to stay in the upper class past 1940, meaning they survived the economic devastation of the Great Depression.
40%.
Right. But if you isolate just the families embedded in a kinship interlock, their survival rate literally doubled. Over 82% of those interlocked families stayed at the very top.
It's staggering.
That web acted as a highly effective shock absorber against the greatest economic collapse of the century.
And that shock absorber operates through 2 primary mechanisms. First, it forms a protective force field that insulates kin from economic, legal, and social risk. Second, it acts as a propulsion engine, actively pushing kin into even higher strata by giving them access to massive new collaborative resources.
All right, we need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to dive into exactly how that protective force field works when the capital completely vanishes. Okay, so before the break, we introduced this idea of the kinship interlock acting as a protection force field. And we need to explore exactly how this works when the worst happens, because it's not just a matter of a rich uncle writing a check when someone falls on hard times.
No.
Sometimes the capital truly does evaporate entirely.
It does. And to understand how a kinship interlock saves a family when the money is completely gone, we have to look at the story of Inez Thomas and her daughter, Sharon Rubish.
Yeah, this story is an incredible illustration of how social capital actually functions, because Inez Thomas was born into the kind of wealth that is just difficult to conceptualize.
Extremely wealthy.
Her father, Mike Thomas, was a millionaire cotton broker. This was a family that split their time between a palatial estate in the center of Dallas and extensive trips to London, where, by the way, Inez actually dated the Prince of Wales.
Which is just a crazy detail.
Yeah, right. And in 1915, Inez was chosen as the lead debutante in the Idlewild Ball, which was the absolute pinnacle of high society in the city.
And we should pause here to explain what the Idlewild Ball actually represented sociologically. was not just a fancy party.
Right.
An elite debutante ball is a highly regulated marketplace for endogamy.
Endogamy.
Yes. Endogamy is the practice of marrying strictly within one's own specific social or ethnic group. So the ball was essentially a mechanism to introduce the daughters of the elite to the sons of the elite, ensuring that wealth and status consolidated rather than dispersed.
It's an organized merger event?
Precisely. By being the lead debutante, Inez was granted the highest level of social legitimacy the city could bestow. Her father was simultaneously an economic, political, and social elite.
But then the Great Depression hit. And unlike Betty Aldrich, who had that massive, dense web of relatives across multiple sectors, Inez's kinship interlock was actually quite sparse.
Yeah, it was very vulnerable.
It was heavily centralized around her father's empire. So when the stock market crashed, that empire didn't just take a hit, it completely crumbled. The debts mounted so high that Mike Thomas ended up spending the last years of his life squatting in his own empty family mansion, literally warding off creditors with a shotgun.
The visual of a former millionaire defending an empty mansion with a shotgun, it perfectly captures the totality of their financial ruin.
It's bleak.
It is. Inez and her young daughter Sharon, who was born right as the market crashed, actually, they fell completely off the social registers. To survive, Inez started making and selling homemade pickles just to pay for Sharon's private school tuition.
From dating royalty to selling homemade pickles.
Exactly. They both eventually had to take jobs modeling Neiman Marcus just to buy groceries. And Sharon's father, who was a penniless carpenter's son, Inez, had married in this rare departure from elite norms. He eventually took his own life in despair.
So at this point, I have to push back a little because the force field appears to have totally failed. I mean, they went from royalty to selling pickles and hiding from debt collectors. Where's the protection?
Well, that is the crucial question. And the answer requires us to understand the profound difference between wealth and status.
Okay.
Over a century ago, the pioneering sociologist Max Weber theorized that while economic class is based on the objective control of goods and services, status is based on a shared social belief.
The shared belief.
Right. Wealth is just numbers in a ledger. It can vanish overnight in a market crash. But status is memory. You cannot lose the fact that the entire city remembers you as the queen of the 1915 Idlewild Ball. That shared memory operates as a shadow currency.
Status is durable even when capital is brittle.
Exactly. They lost their wealth entirely, but they retained their status. Because Inez was still deeply respected by the social elites, the men of the ultra-exclusive Idlewild Club did something absolutely unprecedented when Sharon came of age.
What did they do?
They invited Sharon to debut, and they explicitly waived the expectation that Inez would have to pay for the lavish, expensive ball that usually accompanies it. They essentially subsidized her entry into the marriage market.
Wow, status was the parachute that deployed right before they hit the ground.
It really was.
And Inez urged Sharon to accept this, hoping it would lead to a good match that could restore their position. So Sharon borrows a dress from her godmother, makes her debut, and within months, she marries Tom Blake.
Yep.
And Tom was a wealthy Houston oil man who possessed his own dense kinship interlock. As Sharon later noted, with him there was no chicken today, feathers tomorrow. His wealth was insulated and durable. Her inherited status rescued them when their money vanished, allowing her to marry back into capital.
But the protection of the kinship interlock extends far beyond just shielding families from poverty. It also shields them from the legal system.
Oh.
Which brings us right back to our cold open. John T. Higginbotham Jr., the King of Diamonds.
Right. The thief who left his literal footprints at the crime scenes. We established that a detective threatened a victim to prevent her from pressing charges. Why on earth would law enforcement actively protect a serial burglar?
Because John's kinship interlock was incredibly dense and heavily fortified with political power. While Inez Thomas relied on a sparse network, John had dozens of elite kin tangled across every major institution in the city and state.
So he's untouchable.
Completely. When a family is that deeply embedded, arresting one of their own isn't just seen as a matter of criminal justice. It is interpreted as a political attack against an entire ruling class.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the family's colossal local power and social standing completely intimidated the local authorities. The system simply refused to prosecute one of its central nodes.
It is essentially the concept of being too big to fail, but applied to criminal law.
Precisely.
And the data set reveals that the King of Diamonds wasn't an isolated incident, right? These families routinely bypass the legal consequences of embezzlement, tax evasion, and even violence.
Yeah, the most chilling example in the text is the case of Lester Crawford. Now, Lester did not possess a fortune of his own, but he was embedded in a highly powerful interlock.
Okay.
His mother, Kate Crawford, was the former daughter-in-law of a U.S. senator, and she had methodically built incredible wealth and political ties through a series of strategic marriages. Well, one day, Lester murdered a man in cold blood in the lobby of a local bank, right in front of witnesses.
A public execution in a bank lobby. I mean, you literally cannot get more brazen than that.
And yet, he walked away.
Unbelievable.
His mother immediately leveraged her network. She used a substantial bribe and called upon her deep political connections to secure Lester a full unconditional pardon from the governor of Texas.
Wow.
The justice system was entirely subverted by the deployment of maternal wealth and political capital.
It is infuriating to hear, honestly, but it perfectly illustrates the central thesis. The interlock is a comprehensive shield. If your capital fails, your social status saves you. If you break the law, your political power saves you. It is a self-healing ecosystem designed to maintain its own borders.
Exactly. And once that ecosystem has successfully protected a family from falling, it activates its second primary function.
The propulsion engine.
Right. It's not just a safety net. It is an active engine of accumulation. The intimate exchange of wealth, status, and power actively propels kin into even higher echelons.
So if the protection force field stops you from falling, there has to be this opposing force, something that throws you upward. Because these families aren't just surviving the generations, they are actively compounding their influence. How exactly does this propulsion work in practice?
Well, to explain this, the researcher draws on the work of sociologist C. Wright Mills, who described this upward trajectory in two phases. First, there is the big jump. This occurs when an individual comes into a strategic position that allows them to suddenly appropriate a massive new influx of resources.
Like a sudden level up?
Yes. Second, there's the slow, multidimensional accumulation of advantage over time, the mechanisms that ensure the rich get richer. And kinship interlocks are the ideal environment for orchestrating a big jump.
And the data set provides a really perfect narrative to illustrate this corporate-style synergy. Let's return to Sharon Rubush, the young woman who wore the borrowed dress to her debutante ball and married the Houston oil man to escape poverty.
Right. Sharon's story does not end with that first marriage. She actually divorced the oil man after a couple of years and moved back to Dallas with her young daughter.
Okay.
Shortly after returning, she met and married a man named Pollard Simons. Now, Pollard was astronomically wealthy, a true titan of capital.
But there was a catch.
A massive structural problem. Pollard was Jewish, and mid-century Dallas was governed by rampant systemic anti-Semitism. The elite clubs and social networks that controlled the city's highest echelons strictly barred Jewish residents from entry.
So he has limitless capital, but he is completely locked out of achieving social elite status. He's facing a regulatory blockade in high society.
Exactly.
But Sharon had immense brand equity. She was this legendary socialite with deep historical roots in the city's ruling class. She knew how to navigate the unwritten rules and how to talk to anyone, from local tycoons to national politicians. So by marrying, they essentially executed a perfect vertical integration of assets.
That is exactly what it was.
Yeah.
They both experienced a massive big jump through this union. Pollard immediately gained the VIP social access he had been historically denied.
Right.
Sharon began hosting lavish, highly publicized events at their home, entertaining everyone from sitting presidents and international princesses to senators and even alleged mafia bosses.
Wow, quite the guest list.
Yeah. And the social connections Sharon cultivated became Pollard's new allies and business partners, allowing his already immense fortune to multiply exponentially.
And as his wealth grew, it propelled Sharon's status even higher. I love this detail. The ultimate symbol of this propulsion occurred when Pollard purchased a massive, sprawling mansion, and the location was not a coincidence.
No, it wasn't.
It was literally right next door to the estate. Sharon's grandfather, Mike Thomas, had lost during the Great Depression. She returned in absolute triumph to the exact geographic center of her family's former glory.
It's like a movie. They traded their specialized assets to overcome their individual deficits. He provided the capital, she provided the legitimacy.
It's like they traded their specialized superhero powers.
Yes.
You know, he had the infinite wealth cheat code, she had the VIP access cheat code, and together they unlocked the whole game.
Exactly. And it is important to note that this propulsion doesn't just happen between spouses. It cascades across generations and through various branches of the family tree.
Like a relay race where everyone is passing the batons of influence back and forth.
Yes. Recall Betty Aldridge, the woman whose family became an unbreakable dynasty. Look at how her family collaborated. Her husband used his position as a district attorney to secure an appointment as a judge.
Right.
That judicial status gave him the credibility to secure a seat on a bank's board of directors. He then used that board seat to bypass normal hiring channels and get his son a prominent job at the bank.
Naturally.
The son leveraged that corporate position to join the exclusive Idlewild Club. He then used his club membership to sponsor and admit his two younger brothers.
Oh, wow.
And finally, embedded in that high-status environment, he met and married a debutante heiress, orchestrating his own big jump into even greater wealth. It is a continuous, multi-person collaborative project.
It is brilliant and ruthlessly effective. If you are inside this network, you are protected from failure and propelled toward infinite success. It sounds like an impenetrable fortress.
It does.
But surely there has to be a catch. You don't just get access to this kind of power without strings attached. We're going to take one more quick break, and when we come back, we are going to look at exactly what happens when you break the rules of the game.
All right, we are back. And before the break, we were talking about how impenetrable this force field of privilege seems. But there's a catch, right?
There is a huge catch. The strings are incredibly thick, and they are woven from absolute conformity. The protection and propulsion of the kinship interlock are not unconditional.
Okay.
To reap the benefits of the network, you must ruthlessly play by the rules of the game. And the historical data from this 122-year period demonstrates that these rules were built entirely on two unyielding pillars: racial dominance and strict heteropatriarchal gender conformity.
Let's examine that first rule, racial dominance and inheritance. The source material highlights a story that is profoundly disturbing, but it is really critical for understanding how fiercely the boundaries of this wealth were policed. It involves a man named Samuel Hearn. Yes. Samuel Hearn was a wealthy white enslaver, and, notably, he was the maternal uncle of Betty Aldridge.
Right.
Samuel lived on a large plantation near Betty's parents. He had a black biological son named Doc, whom he enslaved, along with Doc's mother, Aiseline.
And as the source text painfully points out, white men sexually assaulting black women and subsequently enslaving their own biological children was a horrific systemic reality of this era.
It was.
That brutality was the norm for this class. The white elite did not ostracize Samuel for the violence of enslavement.
No, they did not. What actually triggered the massive scandal and the wrath of the Kinship Interlock was what Samuel did when he died in 1866, roughly a year after Juneteenth.
Right.
In his will, Samuel left his entire massive estate to Doc.
He attempted to legally transfer the capital across the racial boundary.
Sociologically speaking, Samuel was attempting to orchestrate a big jump for his son. By leaving him the estate, he was using the legal mechanism of his will to legitimize Doc, reposition him as a peer in wealth to the White Hearn family, and effectively bring him into the Kinship Interlock.
But the United States has a legal doctrine of testamentary freedom, meaning you theoretically have the absolute right to leave your private property to whoever you want.
Theoretically, yes. But the Kinship Interlock does not actually recognize laws that threaten its structural integrity. The White family's response was swift, coordinated, and absolute. They didn't just disagree with the will, they went to war to eradicate it.
The text notes that their outrage was so profound, they completely excised Samuel's name from all of their extensive family genealogies. They erased his historical existence.
Completely erased him.
And more practically, they immediately launched a barrage of vicious legal attacks in the probate courts to invalidate the will and steal Doc's inheritance.
Yeah. And when Doc tragically died of yellow fever just 2 years later, he left whatever remained of his contested estate to his mother, Aiseline.
Okay.
At that point, the White family escalated their legal assaults even further. Aiseline fought back with every legal tool available to her in the post-Civil War South. But the power imbalance was just insurmountable.
Of course.
The White family, utilizing their connections within the legal system, successfully subverted Samuel's will and absorbed the wealth back into the White network. Aiseline ultimately died penniless.
It is such a devastating story. It really demonstrates that the network will violently correct itself to maintain its exclusivity. They weaponize the probate courts to block the flow of resources because acknowledging a black heir would legitimize the transfer of wealth outside the white monopoly.
Right.
Race was the absolute external boundary of the force field.
Exactly. But the system didn't just police its external racial boundaries.
Right.
It was equally ruthless about policing its internal reproductive boundaries.
Right.
Even if you kept the wealth strictly within the white elite, the network demanded total control over how that wealth reproduced itself. And that brings us to the second rule. Heteronormativity and gender conformity.
The system dictates that you must marry the right person, and you must play your assigned gender role perfectly. Men are expected to manage the capital and direct the businesses. Women are expected to manage the social connections, curate the elite gatherings, and literally reproduce the next generation of heirs.
That's the formula.
And if you step out of line, the network treats you like an infection.
It really does. The fall of the Culberson family is a perfect case study in how the network ejects those who fail to control their own family formation.
This story is wild.
It is. In 1910, Charles Culberson was one of the most powerful men in Texas. He was deeply embedded in a kinship interlock. He had served as the governor of Texas, he was the minority leader of the U.S. Senate, and he was a prominent member of the Idlewild Club.
Wow.
His wife, Sally, brought her own massive inheritance to the marriage. They were the absolute epitome of the establishment.
They had one child, a daughter named Mary, and Mary was doing exactly what she was supposed to do, conforming perfectly to upper-class expectations until she made a catastrophic choice in the marriage market.
Yes.
She fell in love with Alex Robertson. Alex was a shell-shocked British veteran of World War I. He possessed no money, no social status, and no political power.
He was entirely outside the interlock. He brought no assets to the merger.
None.
When Alex formally asked Charles for permission to marry Mary, Charles did not simply refuse the proposal. He utilized his vast wealth to hire a private detective.
Right.
This detective physically kidnapped Alex, forced him onto a steamship, and shipped him off to Buenos Aires to physically remove him from Mary's proximity.
He literally kidnapped his own daughter's fiancé. It sounds absurd, like a plot from a melodrama, but it just shows how desperate he was to prevent his capital from bleeding out of the network. But this extreme intervention backfired spectacularly.
It did. Alex managed to contact the British embassy, which intervened. The kidnapping sparked a massive international incident. It generated front-page headlines across the country, including in the New York Times.
Oh, wow.
The public scandal was so severe and so damaging to his credibility that Charles was actually forced to retire from the Senate in disgrace. His political power evaporated.
And the financial consequences for Mary were just as severe. When Charles and Sally eventually died, they did not leave Mary her inheritance outright. They locked it away in a highly restrictive trust fund, ensuring her husband could not access the capital.
Punishing her from beyond the grave.
Exactly. Mary eventually married Alex anyway, but the strain was immense. They later divorced, and she died childless.
And just like that, the formerly illustrious Culberson family governors, senators, millionaires was permanently erased from the social registers. They vanished from the elite because they could not successfully manage the endogamous reproduction of their line.
Which is fascinating, because it reveals that the force field is fragile from the inside. You can be at the absolute pinnacle of power. But if you break the rules of marriage and reproduction, you can blow up your own dynasty.
Yeah. And if we want to examine the most poignant, tragic example of what happens when the rules of heteronormativity are broken, we have to return one last time to John T. Higginbotham Jr., the King of Diamonds.
Wait, we established earlier that his family's colossal power shielded him from going to prison for a multi-million-dollar crime spree. If the interlock protected him from the law, how did he end up breaking the rules?
Well, the interlock saved him from prison, yes. But John eventually died, estranged, isolated, and entirely separated from his family's protective bubble. He was expelled from the network.
Why?
Because John was gay.
And in mid-century Dallas, within the ultra-conservative upper class, that was an incredibly dangerous reality to navigate.
It was sociologically lethal. A childhood friend of his later noted that in their specific social circle, men were so terrified of being perceived as anything other than hypermasculine that they wouldn't even wear a pink shirt for fear of being called a slur.
Wow.
At first, John attempted to play the game. He worked dutifully at the family business. He courted and became engaged to a very traditional, highly gender-conforming debutante. He tried to execute the required merger.
But the merger failed. A month before the wedding, she broke off the engagement. And after that public failure to conform, John never attempted to form a normative household again. He actually took the spurned engagement ring and placed it inside a glass display case in his living room.
He essentially put the failure of his own conformity on permanent display. And the reaction from his kinship network was a slow, devastating, systemic freeze-out.
Oof.
His father, bound by legal obligation, left him an equal financial inheritance, but completely distanced himself emotionally. A family attorney observed that while his father loved him, he simply did not want anything to do with him.
He became a ghost within his own family.
He did. John slowly drifted away from his society friends because they were all actively participating in the rituals of forming traditional families, and he was not. He eventually left the family business entirely. He stepped outside the protective cocoon.
And without the force field?
Much of his personal fortune evaporated in a real estate bust, and without the family safety net to catch him, he fell hard. Toward the end of his life, the former King of Diamonds was running a modest lawn care service.
Wow.
His old, upper-class peers would literally avert their eyes when they saw him driving through his former wealthy neighborhoods with his lawnmower crews. He eventually passed away from heart failure during the AIDS crisis.
It is a stark, heartbreaking contrast. For an heir deeply embedded in a kinship interlock, stepping outside the bounds of heteronormativity was empirically riskier to his social survival than committing grand larceny.
Exactly.
He could steal millions from his peers and be shielded. But the moment he stopped participating in the gendered marriage market, the force field abandoned him.
That is the profound sociological truth O'Brien uncovers here. Upper-class persistence in the United States was, and largely remains, a heterosexual project. Queer lifeways fundamentally broke the rules of kin formation and intimate exchange. They interrupted the vital cycles of endogamy and biological reproduction that the entire system relies upon to pass the baton of power to the next generation.
Okay, so we have spent a lot of time analyzing the people inside the interlock who were ejected or who failed. But I have to wonder about the people on the outside. Is it entirely impossible to break in if you don't fit the strict demographic mold? Did anyone in this 122-year data set manage to overcome this systemic exclusion?
It was exceedingly rare, but yes, the data does highlight the exception that proves the rule. And to see it, we look at the story of Meyer Lichtenstein. In 1910, Meyer was a marginally upper-middle-class Jewish salesman. He possessed absolutely no elite kin ties. According to this standard economic regression to the mean, his family should have faded into historical obscurity. Furthermore, as we discussed with Pollard Simons, Jewish residents faced intense systemic exclusion from the politically and socially elite circles of the city.
Right, they were barred from the clubs, locked out of the boardrooms. So how did Meyer's descendants end up becoming some of the most powerful and recognizable figures in Texas history?
Well, Meyer's daughter, Minnie, married a man named Hubert Marcus. Early in their marriage, they were so financially strained they had to live with their parents.
Okay.
But together with Herbert's sister and brother-in-law, they pooled their meager resources and launched a luxury department store, a store you have almost certainly heard of. Neiman Marcus.
They built a retail empire.
They didn't just build a retail empire, they built an institution that became sociologically vital to the ruling class. They curated luxury goods with such precision that Neiman Marcus became incredibly necessary to the social functioning of the elite.
Oh, wow.
The socialites relied on it so heavily to display their status that they simply referred to it as the store. By the time Minnie's son, Stanley Marcus, took over the operations in 1950, he catapulted the brand onto the international stage. Stanley Marcus became one of the most powerful political, cultural, and social operators in the entire region.
Even though the elite clubs still stubbornly refused to admit him based on his religion.
Exactly. A family friend noted the deep irony of the situation. Stanley's Judaism kept him officially locked out of the local elite country clubs. But when the richest, most prejudiced members of those very clubs traveled to London or San Francisco and announced they were from Dallas, the very first question the international elite asked them was always, "Oh, do you know Stanley Marcus?"
That is incredible. They couldn't get a membership to the country club, so they just built the sun that the country club was forced to orbit around.
Beautifully said.
By creating an utterly indispensable economic and cultural institution, they made their influence undeniable. They forced the kinship interlocks to engage with them, effectively bypassing the gatekeepers.
And that is the only way to break the mold. If you do not fit the demographic requirements of the interlock, you cannot ask for permission to enter. You have to build an institution so powerful that the existing power structures have no choice but to negotiate with you.
This has been an absolutely mind-bending journey through the hidden architecture of power. We have mapped out the force fields of protection that catch the elite when they fall. We have examined the propulsion engines of collaborative advantage that launch them higher. And we have stared directly at the brutal, exclusionary rules of race and gender that govern the entire machine. If we synthesize all of this data, how should this change the way we view the world today?
The primary takeaway here is that inequality is incredibly stubbornly sticky. And it is not just because of abstract tax policies or individual billionaires hoarding cash in a vacuum.
Right.
It is sticky because it is maintained by these sprawling, collaborative, multi-generational family projects. When we observe the 1%, we are not just looking at isolated, wealthy individuals. We are looking at specific nodes within a highly organized kinship network. These networks actively hoard resources, they meticulously insulate themselves from the consequences of their actions, and they aggressively manage exactly who is allowed to join them across generations.
Which brings us entirely back to you, the listener, because the next time you see a political dynasty effortlessly putting a third generation into a Senate seat, or you read about a nepotism baby dominating a creative industry, or you watch a wealthy family weather a massive legal scandal that would financially and socially obliterate anyone else, you know exactly what you are witnessing.
You really do.
You are not just looking at a lucky individual, and you are not just looking at the result of a brilliant PR team. You are watching a kinship interlock operate perfectly. You are seeing a machine do exactly what it was engineered to do over the last 150 years.
It fundamentally changes your analytical lens. You stop seeing a series of isolated, fortunate events, and you start seeing the invisible structural webbing that connects the capital, the political influence, and the social legitimacy.
It really does. And before we close, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that pushes past the historical data and looks to the future. The source material makes it abundantly clear that this entire system, this invisible fortress of wealth and power, relies on very traditional, highly constrained models of marriage and biological inheritance.
Absolutely.
It requires the traditional nuclear family to pass the baton, but society is changing rapidly. As people increasingly rely on chosen families, as marriage rates continue to drop, and as the cultural definition of family fundamentally evolves, what happens to the kinship interlocks of tomorrow?
It's a great question.
If the 1% can no longer rely on the old, rigid rules of heteronormative marriage and strict bloodlines to seamlessly hoard their power, will these ancient force fields finally begin to shatter? Or will the ultra-rich simply invent a brand new game with brand new rules to keep us all locked out?
Heliox is produced by Michelle Brucker and Scott Bleakley. It features reviews of emerging research and ideas from leading thinkers, curated under their creative direction with AI assistance for voice, imagery, and composition. Systemic voices and illustrative images of people are representative tools, not depictions of specific individuals. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other episodes, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.